यच्छन्ति देवाः शृण्वन्तं न स्वप्नाय स्पृहयन्ति.
Good morning, everybody. So the topic of my presentation is yogic perceptions of Aryan-Dravidian controversy. So prior to European Indology, the term Arya and Dravida basically had cultural and geographic connotations. So see, to analyze this issue, we need to understand four aspects. So they are culture, geography, race and linguistics. So prior to European Indology, only two of these things were basically the commonly used meanings of these terms. Now later they got racial and linguistic interpretation based on the work of primarily these two people plus a lot of other people. So Max Muller gave a lot of fillip to the Aryan side and Bishop Caldwell gave it on the Dravidian side. So what happened after the work of these two people, the four things got conflated. So culture, geography, race and linguistics, they all got put together into one single framework. So what was separate streams so now became one and it got completely mixed. So currently what is known as the political Dravidian movement. So it has three components. So one part is the Aryan invasion theory. At that time that was the name, so now it has different names like Aryan migration, Aryan trickle-in theory. The other component is that the Dravidians were the indigenous people of this region and the Aryans came from somewhere in the north and invaded and took over their land and culture. And the third component is the Tamil pride component of that. So in this paper we are focused mainly on the first two boxes, the Aryan invasion theory and the indigenous Dravidian component of that. Now see, these are basically the ideological foundations of this movement. So I am not focusing on the movement per se, I am focusing mainly on the ideological foundation of these movements, and the first two components have been challenged by a lot of people including these people. So somebody has, like say Shrikant Arigari has in Rig Veda, the historical analysis, given a historical point of view of the Rig Veda and pointed out that not only was there no invasion, probably there was a migration out of India. So that is his thesis. Rajiv Malhotra has given the political aspect of the entire Dravidian movement and how the different forces are aligning to basically create a divisive identity. So that is one aspect. Dr. Nagaswamy has shown that there is a close link between the Dharma culture which is prevalent throughout India, and Tamil is one manifestation of that. The Tamil culture is one manifestation of the same unified culture. And Michel Danino has shown a continuity of civilization in the northern part of India, northwestern, central part of India from very ancient times. So these have basically challenged the different components of the entire movement, the ideological components of the movement. So the purpose of this paper is not an examination or a rebuttal of the political Dravidian movement. That is not my area of expertise. So what I am trying to do is to understand the ideological foundations of the movement and what the rishis have to say about that. So I have taken in this case Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo and Shri Ravi Shankar. So what do they have to say about this specific movement or the components of this movement? Now we will take a slide. We have to, in Indic thought, it's assume it's all schools of thought except that ignorance is the root cause of all sufferings. That is common to all the different schools of thought, and true knowledge is required to overcome sufferings. And knowledge was not taken lightly in the Indic system throughout India. So we had a very well developed system of epistemology. So the two questions it deals with is the nature of knowledge and the extent of knowledge. For example, if you take a world which is two-dimensional and you produce a sphere, for two-dimensional people the sphere will still look like a circle. That is one example. The traditional example is that of the 6 blind men and the elephant. So each gives a different perspective of the whole. So epistemology tries to understand what is known, what is not, the limits and the means by which such things can be known. Now, in the Nyaya framework, Nyaya is one of the 6 astic schools. So, if you see the terms, the definition of Nyaya by Vatsyayan, a critical examination of the objects of knowledge by means of canons of logical proof. So, this is grounded thoroughly in what is known as science. Each and every point has to be logical, and it has to be accepted by a large body of people based on scientific methods. So, some of the common related terms, if you see, science of causes, inquiry, epistemology, categories, reasoning. So, what are the different means of knowledge in Nyaya which accepts? So, Pratyaksha, Anuman, Upaman and Shabd. Pratyaksha is basically perception in this empirical world. Use what you see, what you hear, given the 5 senses and the 3-dimensional world that we live in. Anuman is inference, like if there is smoke, there must have been fire. Upaman is comparison. So, if somebody goes to US and doesn't know what a bison is, you tell him it's something which looks like a cow. When he actually goes to US and sees it, he knows, okay, this is probably what he was talking about. And Shabda is somebody is telling you that he is an expert in bison, he is telling you this is a bison. So, the traditional example is somebody wants to cross a river, and expert in that place says you can cross it, you can just simply go and walk, and he will take that word as Shabd. So, that is Shabda Praman. So, it is basically the instructive assertion of a reliable person. Now, this is a very key thing. So, the definition of reliable person is not very easy. So, they have to meet certain criteria to become reliable person, and only then can we take their word as assertions, valid assertions. Now, there are 2 kinds of testimony, Vedic, Laukic. Some things which are verifiable in this frame of reference, few things which cannot be verified in this frame of reference. Like, for example, a doctor says you take a medicine, you will become better. So, that is immediately verifiable. And maybe some rishi says that if you do this yajna, you will reach Swarg. Now, that is not immediately verifiable in this specific frame of reference. Now, the definition of who can be an apta. Apta is basically an expert or somebody who has deep knowledge of a specific subject or range of subjects. So, the traditional definition is he can be a rishi, he can be an arya, he can even be a foreigner, provided he basically has these 3 qualities within him. So, he should be knowledgeable, he should be compassionate, and he should be communicative. So, not only should he be knowledgeable, he should want to share his knowledge with other people, and he should communicate that knowledge in a very effective way so that it can reach a wide amount of people, large amount of people. Now, if we take only in the previous slide, if we consider a rishi, so there is also something called rishi state. So, rishis are generally known as mantra drashta. So, they are able to perceive or cognize higher truths. Now, and there are numerous such recordings of rishis being able to garner insights which common people cannot normally do. In fact, there are studies, I mean this is not something which is illogical, it is grounded in studies. So, there are a lot of actually studies which use different correlates for brain mapping and try to find out, okay, if somebody is doing certain meditation, is he able to, does he show something which is different from other people who do not follow these practices. Like in the transcendental meditation program of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, there have been studies which actually show that, okay, people who follow these, it's actually scientific, testable and can be repeated. These are the 3 criteria for any scientific process. So, if we use that definition, so rishi and rishi state, and given the context of Nyaya, so Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo and Shri Ravi Shankar, they may be considered aptas in that specific sense. I have described that in the paper. So, because they are, if you see the criteria once again, so they are knowledgeable, they are compassionate and they are communicative, huge followings and able to communicate their knowledge very effectively. So, now we will see what these people have to say for the Aryan and Dravidian controversy from the component point of view, not the movement. See, the movement started much later, but the building blocks for these movement came as early as 1850s, 1860s, 1800s it started. So, what did they have to say? So, Swami Vivekananda, see, people know him as a monk, as an extraordinary intellectual, but he was also mystic, and there are various recordings of his mystic powers. Now, generally those are called hagiographies, but I mean, because they're written by their Shishyas. But we can also consider that as recorded by, it's a recording basically of things which they perceive to be happening. So, Swami Vivekananda treated the Aryan and Dravidian language families as distinct language families. He viewed entire India as one people. He did not accept that Aryans invaded India and subjugated native Dravidians. So, if you see his complete works, there are a lot of places he's actually talked about his views or his perceptions of the Aryan Dravidian controversy, and he rejected. He says he categorically rejects the Aryan theory and all its vicious corollaries. So, he says in this, whatever may be the import of the philological terms Aryan and Tamilian, the dividing line had been from the most ancient times one of language, not of blood. So, he is very categoric about this assertion. So, now we move on to the second person. So, I have given this in my paper in details what else he has said. So, next is Sri Aurobindo, he comes later. So, he was a polyglot, he knew many languages, 10, 15, and he was a mystic and yogi of the highest order. These are recorded by his students, by other people also, and he understood at that time the nuances of the Aryan Dravidian identity issue and what could be its political ramifications. He understood that very well actually. So, he rejected the theory that barbarous Aryan invaders supposedly invaded, conquered and subjugated civilized Dravidians. So, he rejected that. He mentions that in his books, and he says, is it simply not a myth of philologists to, so he does not reject the philological separation, but the fact that people are trying to conflate race and philology together. So, that is what he rejected, and he discarded the sharp distinction between Aryan Dravidian races created by philologists. In fact, he actually posited at that time a common link between Indo-Aryan and Dravidian language families. This is his own intuition, which he says that it could have been that these two divergent language families derived from one lost primitive tongue. Now, see, this might seem absurd today, but there are actually theories which posit that during the last ice age, so before the ice age, people had a language continuum from north to south, but the ice age, the three groups of people got isolated, and these tongues got these language families developed into the Indo-Aryan, Dravidian and the Tibeto-Burman language families. So, that is one, there are a group of scholars who actually believe that, and this happened roughly around 10-12,000 years ago, is what certain scholars believe. But this is what he posited around 100 years ago based on his intuition and his understanding of the subject. Now, Shri Ravi Shankar, he has also demonstrated, if you read the works of his followers, and there are papers written about him, that he actually received the Sudarshan Kriya technique. So, this is to highlight his mystical powers during a certain 10-day period, and the fact that he is communicative, influential, the fact that he is across 155 countries and impacted 370 million people is a testimony to his wide reach. So, he refers to the Aryan invasion theory as complete falsehood. So, this is basically derived from his lectures, his books, his satsangs. He laments the fact that textbooks still teach this theory. He very clearly says the term Arya does not have any racial connotations. See, the issue might be philological, but it has got conflated over time with race, linguistics, everything has become one big mixture. So, he is trying to isolate that. He is saying no, there is no racial connotations. The language might be different, but there is no race involved. And among the different gurus, he has a very unique perspective. So, he proposes what is known as the multiple origin model of people. So, if you see even the origin of people, there is a model, competing model. See, one model is the out of Africa model of the origin of people, that people came from Africa, East Africa, something around 100,000 years ago. But there is also a competing model called multiple origins of human race as a whole, but he proposes a multiple origin of people within the Indian subcontinent context, and that he says is closely linked to what even the Puranas say. So, that is his own unique contribution to this field, and here is what he says verbatim. You can read this. They made a lot of distinction, tried to create a divide. So, this is based on his understanding of the issue. So there are others also have rejected this this view. So not only these three people, there are other people. So like Ramana Maharshi's lineage, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, if you read his complete works, there are many places where he categorically rejected this racial connotation. He believed if India is one people. People don't know this, but it's a fact. If you read his works, you'll find in many places he mentioned that these are not different races. Same people, different cultures maybe, but not races. So now, what we have done so far is using Nyaya epistemology and Shabda Praman of these rishis, we have tried to examine the ideological foundations of the movement. And based on what they say, in India we have a very high respect for our gurus and our teachers. So if we accept that traditional way of thinking, we have to reject the colonial racist theories pertaining to Dravidian Aryan schism, and they have to be discarded. That is the conclusion of this paper. So yeah, so before I end, so there's so limitations of this paper. So basically I have taken a small sample set, 3 people, and it's only considers the English language literature. But apart from this, lot of gurus give the discourses in local language. So those have to be captured to bring about a comprehensive what they say basically. So that would be a very interesting and interesting field of study, and that would basically make this study very comprehensive. Thank you.
Any questions from anyone?
Yeah, just on the last point, you mentioned about references of local leaders. So I would like to just share my point on one of the most influential saints, especially in Tamil Nadu, the sage of Kanchipuram, Shri Chandrasekharendra Saraswati.
Right.
So just 2 minutes what he described about the Aryan invasion theory. He outright rejected that it's invented by the British, and he said the Vindhyachal Parvat is the reference, and anything below the Vindhyachal Parvat is Dravida Desham, and anything above Vindhyachal Parvat is called Gauda Desham. So this is documented, it's there in the kamakoti.org website.
Right.
So just I thought I'd share to enrich your
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to make 2 comments quickly.
Sure.
It's great that you shared this kind of evidence, and that's very useful. I mean, to know what our some of the greats of India said about it. Having said that, I do think even the opinion of well-respected individuals is still problematic.
Right.
It can be used by the other side in the same way. For just a quick example, Lokman Natural, for example,
Correct.
he will follow your whole definition here, and he did accept the Aryan invasion theory. And quickly, the second comment, this is I think comment of Arvindo about the separation into 3 different races or languages rather. Ice Age did not affect India as it affected Europe or North America. It did have a climatological effect, but that's it. Otherwise, India was doing just fine.
Okay.
Ice Age.
Any other questions or comments?
Sir, as you talked about Tamil right as a new phenomenon, but you think that before arrival of the British, the Tamil right did not exist?
No, that existed.
It is like
That's why I did not-
but it never conflicted with the other Indian
Yes, yes, everybody is regionally proud as well as nationally proud.
Actually, it is a Brahmic religious terroristic approach. You hate other religion more than you love your religion. So that creates that you hate Indian pride to have a Tamil.
So that's why I did not discuss this. That is a pre-existing thing.
Dr. Kalyanasundaram?
Subhodeep,
Yes.
an extraordinary presentation.
Thank you.
You refer to the Sapta Pramana.
Right.
We have the Sapta Pramana. We have about 8,000 inscriptions written by the people who created the civilization on the banks of the river Saraswati.
Correct.
I think it's important to get into deeply into understanding the hypertext, the HTTP
Correct.
that they evolved 5,000 years ago.
Right. Right.
Pictures overlaid with another picture, and there's some kind of symbol. So what was they trying to communicate? It was something related to their life activity.
Right.
I think this must be addressed so that the Sapta Pramana can be fully established. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a question. You quoted about Sri Ravi Shankar.
Right.
Actually, recently a well-known famous debate has happened between Sri Ravi Shankar and Islamic scholar Zakir Naik.
Okay.
Where Sri Ravi Shankar has written a book where he was mentioning the comparison between different religions.
Okay.
That was very heavily with evidence disputed by the Islamic scholar.
Okay.
Then Sri Ravi Shankar, just what he said, Actually, he mentioned that my book is false, I accept. I have written this because of my intention was to create unity between people, but factually it is not that much correct and scholarly like that we don't. Okay. So what I would like to make is, so I feel we need to stick on to some valid rishis and valid scholars like Swami Vivekananda and Arvindo, like this. I feel that's my humble opinion.
Noted.
So, I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know what Nilesh sir has said. You can't take just people, intellectual scholars, and their single opinions on this, which may later be disputed. For example, you mentioned Ambedkar accepting India as a cultural unity, and that is the biggest strength of India. He mentions this in his books. And on the other hand, we have Hindutva scholars like Savarkar, for example, accepting the Aryan Dravidian theory, accepting that we originally originated in different places, and later on we got into a single culture. So, what do we do? How do we understand? How do we reconcile with these views? They may be affected by those theories in the 1950s or 1940s. So, how do we reconcile today with the evidence showing with the contrary?
Yeah, no, so this paper is very specific in its scope. So, we are trying to address, we have taken the traditional definition of who is an apta, and based on that, we have identified 3 people who qualify for that. And for those people, what they are saying. So, traditionally, this was an accepted means of knowledge, that if an expert says this, we will accept that. Like in medical journal, you don't verify each and every point. Otherwise, I mean, am I right? Yeah. You just take their words as authority. So, in the same way, these are authority figures, and we have accepted that. This is a traditional approach. Whether you accept or not, I mean, that's a different question altogether. Thank you.
What is the hierarchy of the Shabda Pramana in the means of knowledge? I guess it should be the lowest compared to perception and inference and all that.
No, it depends on the school. Like, see, the Buddhist and Jain schools don't accept that. Even for Vaisheshik school, it's the inference which becomes Shabda.
I think within the context of Nyaya, what is the hierarchy between them?
I don't know.
If there is Pratyaksha Praman which is available, then Shabda Praman has lower hierarchy. So it's only when Pratyaksha is not available, when the other kind of means of knowledge are not available, then maybe you fall back on Shabda Praman.
Yeah, like the case is the river crossing example. See, that's the example they give. You don't know how to, is the river crossable or not. That is the case you refer to a person who will tell you, yeah, you can cross this river and go.
Further adding to what Nilesh has said, this is about language families and then family languages. So yesterday Dr. Shri has said there is a kind of language means nation kind of thinking going on. So it is a big point that we have to consider every time we think about and we are dividing ourselves amongst linguistic groups. And it is actually based on requirements. And we also see family languages, especially the traders and merchants. They have their coded languages to communicate. They develop on their own. So Angrezi wanted to develop his own script. So, right. So this is what happens. And Mr. I would not get his name. There's a Panchagod Brahmins and Panch Dravidian Brahmins. So Panchagod Brahmins who reside above the area above the Vindhyachal, and Dravid is.
Yeah, so that's a geographic connotation. I mean, it's, we don't think of it as a distinct race. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think we've reached it.
I think the one point only I want to make is that, see, there is one is the academic study, and second is these people who are held in reverence by so many people. So their work is very important. We have to get it because so many people do get influenced by the Shabda Praman. That is why we have to gather all the, as he said, even in regional languages, whatever has been said by spiritual leaders and gurus, we should gather it all together because people who may not pay attention to the academic evidence, they may listen to this. Because as they said, Tilak, so many people hold him in high reverence. I mean, my book I have studied, I have given in my second book, Rigveda and Historical Analysis. I have given the views of all these people. Now, he has mentioned Swami Vivekananda opposing the theory. But there are many things in his writings where he has even supported it. He has talked about Aryan attack, means I have quoted them in the book. Right. So you see, we are not concerned with that. We have to get it just as a means of influencing people. That for that purpose we require this very much. Okay.
I'm Elite Ramohan, Elite of the Mountain Park Journal from Sri Ramanasundaram. He referred to Ramana Maharshi's opinion and then he referred to Kamachi Paramacharya's opinion. In a discussion with Major Chadwick, British Army officer who settled with Ramana Maharshi later days of his life, Ramana Maharshi has told that Chadwick is actually there is a linkage, a nexus between the people of South America, especially the Machu Picchu region of Peru, and then the South India. There's a possibility of the people from, there's a linkage between the South Indian group and the what you call the Aztecs and the Mayans. There was exchange of civilizational ideas between both of them. And he gave the reference to the Machu Picchu Mother Temple, where people do, even today, the Mayans go around the Machu Picchu Day on Purnami Day, the full moon day. It is exactly the practice followed in South India, even all over India. They go around the Arunachala hill during the Purnami day. Arunachala is considered to be the father mountain, and the Machu Picchu is known as the mother mountain. So there is some invisible, philosophical or spiritual linkage, an umbilical cord between both the civilizations of South America and India. So we do not have to search for an Aryan invasion theory. It's all part of the entire universal whole, which later Sri Aurobindo said. And secondly, Sri Kancha Brahmacharya, during the converse, when a Russian scholar visited him, he asked him what is his name. He mentioned that. He said the name has been derived from a Sanskrit root, and he mentioned that the people like Bharadwaja and they were the rishis, they were originally in northern Russia. They were the citizens of that. From there they had come to India, and then he gave the etymological root for that. Of course, there was no, what you call, like I searched for a proof of that, but then the opinion of the Mahaswami and that the Russian went back to India.
Yeah, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a very enlightening lecture. Thank you very much.
Namaskara. First of all, I must compliment Shri Mukhopadyay for having the absolute perfect introduction to my talk. This name, A Taste of Their Own Medicine, I owe to my friend Nilesh Oak when I told him what I was doing. Basically, I have used as many Western references as possible rather than using our own Indian references, because we are always blamed as being biased. So let's use what they have. 200 years ago, there were no Aryans, no Dravidians. There was no Indian who said that I am tall, fair-skinned, I've got light-colored eyes, my ancestors came riding on horses to India. There was no other Indian who was feeling hurt and saying some invaders have came, they pushed us out. No such thing was there 200 years ago. So what happened? Now we have people who are called Aryans. We are all saying Aryan, 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 whole conference, Aryan, Aryan, Aryan. We are talking Dravidian, Aryan, Dravidian. Aryans came from outside India and they brought their language to India. Fantastic. How did this happen? In order to understand how this happened, we really need to go into late 19th and early 20th century history in Europe. The Europe obviously was an up and coming, power. And those days they got their history mainly from the Greeks and partly from the Bible. Now in the Bible there's this person, this character called Noah, who apparently had this boat and he rescued all the animals. Noah was also apparently the father of all of mankind. Now Noah had 3 sons. One son was called Ham. Now apparently Ham saw his father naked. He probably saw his father having sexual intercourse. So his father, Noah, cursed him and said, all your children are going to be slaves. So what happened is, in those days, of course, all black people were slaves. So all black people, Africans, became Hamites or sons of Ham. Now the other son, Shem. Now all Shem's children became Shemites or Semites. That is, the hated Jews. The Jews were hated in Europe, and the Arabs nowadays were also hated pretty much. So the Europeans were God's favored children. They were the children, the descendants of Japheth. I've made an error there. That word Aryan shouldn't have been there yet. It came much later. But these favored children of God, something really shook their pride. And what shook their pride was the ancient ruins in Assyria. Now, Assyria is the place where this ISIS conflict is going on now. That is, Iraq, southern Turkey, Syria. So they found some magnificent ruins, and along with these ruins, they found some tablets inscribed in cuneiform text. These texts were, in fact, the translation of these texts has a connection with India, but I'm not going to talk about it now. But anyway, these texts were translated, and it was found that this magnificent civilization had names mentioned from the Old Testament. It was the Bible that was older than the Christian Bible. And this really shook up the Europeans. They said, how could the hated Semites have greater antiquity than us? We are the top, we are the older, we are the best. And that went on until the Europeans came to India and they found Sanskrit. Now, until they started studying Sanskrit, they knew that their languages were somewhat similar. They didn't know why they were similar, how they were similar. They just assumed these languages sort of came down from biblical languages. And suddenly, when they studied Sanskrit grammar, this most highly developed language, they understood why Latin grammar was the way it was, why the forms of Greek were the way they were, and why every single European language had words that were there in Sanskrit. And Max Muller wrote, Sanskrit stepped into the midst of these languages, and there came the light and warmth of mutual recognition. Now there was a problem. Now, this language, this highly developed language, was spoken by all Kalus, black-skinned people, dark-skinned people. Why were these Hamites, these sons of Ham, speaking this language? So these scholars debated in Europe. There's lots of references. You can just download them as you like. You'll never finish reading them from archive.org. This Sanskrit language must have come from Europe. The name Aryans came, I'll talk about that in a minute. And the Aryans brought the language to India from Europe, and these Aryans got corrupted by something in India. So a history was invented for Europe and India as follows. Now let me just digress for a minute. There's this word Sundari. Now Sundari means beautiful woman. You can't have a race of Sundarians. Arya means noble person, it's an adjective. You don't have a race of Aryans. There's no such thing. It's totally cooked up. But these people cooked it up. And this Aryan race came all the way to India. And after this Aryan race came to India, they had to explain how these fellows became black. So they found these dark-skinned guys speaking some language they knew nothing about. They were heathens. They were not Christians. So they said, Chalo, these are the fellows who spoilt our dear language, our dear ancestors. This entire business of Dravidians was cooked up. Just like Aryan was cooked up, Dravidian race was cooked up in order to explain how the great white Europeans came to India and brought the language. And we believe this. We are following this every day. So this is what was written. These are actually quotes. I've got about 15, 20 quotes. But this is Thomas Huxley. This was actually a scientific session. In this scientific session, this gentleman said, the Aryan invaders were white men. They intermixed with the dark Dravidian aborigines, all you aborigines here. And then this is a book that sits on my bookshelf. This used to belong to my grandfather. It says, Vedic Aryans received a deep taint from Dravido-Colerian aborigines. And this is our history. Now, we follow this. Fine. Then time moved on. The word Aryan was discarded after World War II because of the Nazis. Till then, everybody was happy to use the word. Then blame it on the Nazis. Wherever Aryan was used, they made it European. So Indo-Aryan languages become Indo-European. You look at older texts, it's Indo-Aryan. Newer text is Indo-European. Nothing else changed. They were still searching for origins somewhere outside India because how can India come up with this sort of thing? There still remained a problem. You see, they had already decided that Sanskrit was an ancient language. How did they decide that Sanskrit was an ancient language? Very simple. Max Muller himself said Buddha lived in 600 BC. There are 4 Vedas. So now that there are 4 Vedas, give 200 years for each Veda, 200, 200, 200, 800 years. 600 BC plus 800 years, 1400 BC, Rig Veda 1400 BC. This is a good date, everybody, because from 1400 BC, now they had to search for a European language just before 1500 BC to put in India. Problem was there was no language, there is no European language older than 1400 BC. So they said, let's look for other evidence. we will somehow link archaeology with language. Fine, fair enough, sounds reasonable, except that anything Indian has been discarded, like somebody said Saraswati Ranan, and it's all wrong. Okay. So, the theory now goes, horses were domesticated in Eurasia. Now, this Eurasia is a very funny thing. What is this Eurasia? Who talks about, were you taught about Eurasia? Anyway, in 4000 BC, this is nonsense. Horses were domesticated in 16 different places. This has been documented genetically. And look at the fantastic thing. These fellows who apparently domesticated horses, they also invented chariots in 2000 BC. Great. Hats off to this race. Now, what's even more fantastic than this is these people who domesticated horses and these people who invented chariots, they used to speak a precursor language to Sanskrit in that place. How do they know? There is absolutely no proof. There are no texts, there are no tablets, there's no narrative, nothing. It's just been pulled out of a hat. These people used to speak Proto-Indo-European. There is no proof whatsoever. And then these fantastic people, they got on their chariots, tied the horses, and they rode to Europe, they rode to India, Iran, and then Indo-Iranian and all that happened. So this is the story that we are now taught. Now, how was the link? See, after all, language. In India, there was no archaeological evidence. If people are telling me there were no horses in India, there was only language, Rig Veda. Well, over there, there's archaeological evidence. So how do you link the archaeology with the Indian Rig Veda? It's like this. For instance, now one of the things, there's a place called Andronovo in Russia. Now, in this Andronovo, there was this culture in Andronovo. This was the real horse culture. These people used to eat horses. 70% of the bones they found there are horse bones. And even the pots show evidence of horse milk. There's biochemical evidence now. And, if you look at Rig Veda, there's no horse milk, it's always cow's milk and ghee and all. Anyway, this horse milk drinking, horse eating people, they used to have these deep 3-story graves where the bottom story was a chariot was buried, then they would have pillars and a roof, and they'd bury a human being on top of that. More pillars, one more roof, they would bury a horse. So how do you link this with the Rig Veda? Now, don't bother reading the small text on top. That is the actual translation from R.L. Kashyap. There are other translations as well. There is one particular sukta in the Rig Veda that speaks about a dead man being buried. It just speaks about a dead man being buried. It says nothing about horse, it says nothing about pillar, it says nothing. But yet, we have this contemporary historian, David Anthony, who says, one hymn, Rig Veda 10:18, describes a covered burial chamber with posts holding up the roof, walls shored up, and the chamber sealed with clay, a precise description of Sintashta and Andronovo grave. This is a bluff. And this is part of contemporary. I have seen this reference in genetics papers from Russia. And we read this and we say, wow, this is fantastic. They've come from Russia. Let me carry on. Genetic studies will never tell you anything about language. If you look at somebody's genes and say this fellow used to speak this language, it's rubbish. You cannot take anybody's genes and say this guy spoke Gujarati, that guy spoke Tamil, this fellow spoke French. Genes, human genes are human genes, horse genes are horse genes, no language. There's no connection with language. But yet, this Aryan invasion theory is so deeply entrenched in literature. See, genetic studies, they're honest guys, they're scientists, they're doing studies, they want to look for migrations to see if they can find any connection between their genes and migration. And they look through history books and they find this Aryan invasion theory, 1400 BC, 1000 BC. Naturally, they found nothing. They found absolutely nothing. There's no real connection at that time. So what is the genetic history of India? This map has been taken from a paper by Tamang Singh and Tangraj. Lalji Singh, unfortunately, the gentleman died just about 10 days ago, just as I was preparing this talk. There was an initial migration from Africa 65,000 years ago that came along the peninsula, went on to the Andamans and to Australia. There was another overland migration into India 45,000 years ago. It is possible, perhaps even likely, that these two ancient populations mixed in India to form the current genetic picture of India. What is the current genetic picture of India? This was first described by a person called Reich in a 2009 paper. And in fact, the gentleman we saw yesterday on Skype, Gyaneshwar Chaube, is one of the co-authors of this paper. The Indian genetic picture consists of a mix of genes called ancestral South Indian and ancestral North Indian genes. These genes are unique to India. They do not occur in, say, Iranians or Europeans or Southeast Asians. The mix of genes among Indians varies from approximately 40 to 60%, 45%, 55%. There tends to be a cline with more ancestral North Indian in the north and more ancestral South Indian in the south. There is no correlation between caste, creed, color, or tribal or Indo-European or this so-called cooked up Dravidian language business. And I must point out the genes are over 12,500 years old. There's nothing from 3,500 years ago, nothing from 1,400 BC. And so these are some more papers which say the same thing. I won't go into the detail, but I've deliberately highlighted in red. They found a heart attack gene 33,000 years old. Now, nothing about genetics, but this number 33,000, attracted my attention. In Madhya Pradesh, there are a set of caves called the Bhimbetka caves. And there are paintings in these caves. There are paintings of people dancing. There are paintings of people hunting. You see, when you have a culture that dances and a culture that paints on walls, this is a culture that already had a language. So here in Bhimbetka, 33,000 years ago, there was a set of Indians who had a culture, who had a language. Now, what language was that? Does anybody know the name? No, you're all going to shake your heads. But on the other hand, if you ask a linguist, what is the name of a language in a particular place? If the linguist does not know the name, he looks at what language is spoken here today and he adds proto to it. So he says Celtic languages are spoken here, Proto-Celtic was spoken at that time. German is spoken here, Proto-German. What was spoken in Bhimbetka was Proto-Indian. There is no need for us to postulate some fellows coming with Proto-Indo-European, some fellows coming from Russia riding on horses. And in a span of 3,500 years, not only this, just over 800, 900 years, they covered whole of India, quickly came into Tamil Nadu, and within 700 years, they were writing this Sangam literature. I mean, we believe this because we love the white man, we will fall at his feet. One way to get out of this mess is to try and see how old our texts are. Of course, there are references. David Frawley says it comes from 6000 BC. Tilak and Jacobi have references from 4000 BC. I've highlighted my friend Nilesh Oak because I believe his work is very rigorous, and this is something you can try and tear down, you can debate with him. So I believe that. The other thing is there is something that I'm working on right now which correlates with this. So what am I working on right now? I'm trying to look at alternative dating methods for the Vedas and other texts, and this is how far I've got so far. If you look at the Vedas, Manusmriti and Harappa, they share the same geography. Now the Veda era was a forested environment, and there was a river that used to flow all the way to the sea. The Aranyakas, for instance, are mantras that are said to be in the forest, so it has to be a forested environment. Now there is evidence now that is pollen evidence, or what is called as palynological evidence of the area being forested. There is also evidence of geological cores taken from the Gagarakra river and the Ran of Kutch, showing that the river used to flow all the way to the sea 10,000 years ago. We are looking at the date of the Vedas being at least 10,000 years old. Now Manusmriti is very interesting. Manu mentions cotton. Now cotton is known from 9,000 years ago, so Manu is probably post 9,000. Manu again mentions the drying Saraswati river. Now the drying started after 10,000 years. 10,000 years to 6,000 years drying went on. So it's probably between 9,000 and 6,000 years ago. The other thing that's mentioned in Manusmriti is he advises students to wear deer skins. And if they can't get spotted deer skins, give me a little time, one more minute. Spotted, you either wear spotted deer skins or wear, garments of flax and hemp. So this is again a forested environment. You need to have deer to hunt and you need to have flax and hemp to wear. It can't have been as recent as Harappa because nobody in Harappa was wearing deer skin. There are hardly any deer bones to be found, and we do know that they were wearing cotton and silk. So we are talking about three different eras, and we are talking about a Vedas that were 10,000 years ago, Manusmriti between that, and now we have Harappa. So let me conclude by saying that Aryan and Dravidian are concoctions of racist Indologists. They never existed. We really need to stop using this silly terminology. We need to decolonize our minds. Don't call them Dravidian languages, call them South Indian languages, call them coastal, peninsular, whatever you like. Stop using Dravidian. Stop using this silly racist word Aryan. Genes cannot tell you what, you don't talk genetics for language. Genes are not going to tell you what. And the unique Indian genetic picture is much, much older than 1500 BC of it. It's 12,500 years old. And nowadays there's more and more textual, astronomic, archaeobotany, and paleogeological evidence that place the Vedas much older than 5000 BC. Now, one last comment, I have to say this because I feel like it. I just want to say, இங்கே வந்து பேசுறதுக்கு அவகாசம் கொடுத்தவருக்கு அப்புறம் உங்களுக்கெல்லாம் ரொம்ப நன்றி. Thank you.
Dr. Shastri, my question to you is that don't you think that for building this Indian narrative, we need to have the right mix of evidences from the medical part, especially gene-based, estimation and telling that the South Indian, North Indian, the so-called, is actually the same race and the same haplotype that is there. Secondly, we also should probably focus on archaeological evidences which can link with this evidence that comes from the gene pool, and also talk of the spiritual as well as the way we have from the mind point of view we are talking of all these thinking which should be inculcated and which has been inculcated in the past for thousands and thousands of years. Don't you think that to build the Indian narrative, more people like you, I'm a scientist by profession, I am not part of humanities. Don't you think that we people, including scientists, engineers and doctors, along with archaeologists and other people, should also be part of the narrative? Because I find that here you don't have that many representation and that many papers. More papers should come probably. I mean, what's your opinion on that?
No, you're absolutely correct, but I'd like to correct a little error that you have made. You cannot use genes to talk about language, one.
Yes,
okay.
I agree.
The genetic picture of India is now getting defined as being something fairly uniform that doesn't correlate with language or caste. Okay, that is fairly straightforward.
So I am not talking of language. Let me just interrupt. I have been studying patterns of why people have different skins, because I'm developing some products where I'm looking at why people use skin creams and why people have melatonin in their skin tone. So based on that, I touched upon so much of evidence for doing products for my clients for whom I'm working that I did not learn from science. I learned from archaeology and many other evidences. So I'm just saying that this is the point.
No, there is a problem here. You see, it can only be guesswork. If you find those genes in India currently, and if you find those genes elsewhere, another place, genetic studies of how old genes are like scratches on your car. You buy a new car, there are no scratches. 1 year old car will have more scratches, 2 years older, 2 years will have more scratches, 3 years and so on. So you have a badly scratched up car that's 15 years old. So it's sort of guesswork about how old it is. Ideally, unfortunately we don't have a climate like Europe or Russia or even dry climate like China. You need to find a mummy, you need to find a dead man or woman whose bones or whose teeth can be looked at for genes. And then you get to know about the local genes, and then you get to know about how old they are and a better idea of how old they are. But apart from that, nobody really knows. From the field of medicine, nobody really knows. And unfortunately, let me say this from the medical viewpoint. I grew up blindly trusting my teachers and my authors. There was a lot of nonsense. There was a lot of stuff that was written that was complete nonsense. A lot of stuff written from a personal perspective of we would like it to be this way. Okay? So yes, I absolutely agree with you. More science people need to come in, but I think we Indians need a little bit more confidence to understand how much, see, the minute you say something came from India, somebody is going to say you're a jingo. But this whole business of cooking up the Aryan theory was pure jingoism and racism. But for them, we call this science, and it becomes our jnana. They are our Vedic seers, our former Western masters. But our guys are all biased. We need to get out of this colonized mindset. And yes, of course, we need scientific people. And once again, I want to commend Shri Mukhopadyay for what I thought was a very good paper. It's very sort of, shall I say, based on the way papers should be done. And unfortunately, I don't know, I'm a Macaulayite, I don't know all the words that he used, but that's what it was.
So just, I think just flagging the issue raised by the gentleman. I think, sir, the whole genetics debate when you look at it, especially the proponents of the Aryan invasion theory, they suffer from what I call the cart before the horse phenomenon. They, first, it is the whole story of the genetics is one of shifting goalposts. First, until 2010, 2011, everybody was talking about mitochondrial DNA. And now, when mitochondrial DNA produces incontrovertible evidence that there is nothing of this Aryan invasion which happened, especially one paper from CCMB and Harvard University which came in. Now they're looking at Y chromosome studies, and now I think there's this seminal paper. I think one guy called Razib Khan brought it out, and I think Tony Joseph brought it big time in Hindu and Outlook, which I think Nilesh sir appropriately gave a rebuttal to. Now they are saying that we'll have to look at Y chromosome, and they came out with this crazy hypothesis saying that that there's only males migrated in the past few thousand years. That's
I'd like to comment on that. There is actually a 2011 paper. Okay, it's very interesting. There's a set of male genes. It's a Y haplotype, R1A1A1. It's called M17. Now M17 has its maximum diversity. That means it is the oldest. Where in Gujarat, Modi state. Now M17 is moved all the way from Gujarat to Poland. Okay. Now after reaching Poland, what it's done is, and this is more than 5,000, about 10,000 years ago, it's done that. And what it's done in Poland is it is broken off, and there's another gene that's come out of that. It's called M458 or 548. I've forgotten. Now this M458 has not come back into India. So there's incontrovertible evidence of some men having gone and mated with a series of women all the way up to Poland, and their sons not coming back. None of this is proof, okay, but this is all highly emotional stuff, and we shouldn't react to, excuse my language, morons like Tony Joseph. We really shouldn't bother.
Sir, one question.
Yeah.
Any news about the status of the Taki baby skeletons, the report which is about to come out any time now regarding the R1A1 gene?
No news, but I will guess that they will find nothing. These things don't survive in India. Okay, in this dry weather, they will find nothing. They'll find one of the researchers' genes, but because it will have got then they will know that, and they will send it to from Kolkata. They'll send it to Bonn. Those Bonn guys will again say nothing. Then will send it to Los Angeles. Nothing will happen. Don't worry. And even if you find one, now imagine, supposing the genes they find was one fellow who came really running on his horse to India. Then we're all going to fall down crying, oh, say it's true. Forget about it. Don't worry about Rakhi Gari. There is enough evidence against it. Forget this 1,400. Why are we stuck on this 1,400? This is exactly an example of putting cart before horse. They first decided that the language came from somewhere. Then they decided the date. Now they are looking for proof of that date. This is rubbish.
Namaste everybody, thank you for joining us during our presentation. Our regards to the chair of the session, Shri Taladedi and all the other luminaries in the room. I'm Manogna Sastry, I'm an astrophysicist by training from Indian Institute of Astrophysics, Bangalore. And this is my fourth presentation on the SI platform. I've presented in both the previous conferences as well. And Megh will also introduce himself when he presents his part. So our paper titled The A of ABC of Indian Chronology, Dimensions of the Aryan Problem Revisited in 2017, expands on A part of the ABC, which is a framework comprising of 4 chronological milestones, A for Aryan, B for the Bharata as in Mahabharata, as well as Buddha Gautama, and C for Chandragupta. This is a framework which we introduced in our SI2 paper, Purvapaksha of Sheldon Pollitt's use of chronology, which we believe represent the key milestones and points of divergence between the insider drishti and the outsider drishti. So one has seen over the course of yesterday's discussions the numerous disfigurations that have resulted in the West study of India. So constructing a revised historical account of India's past and her heritage has been a central tenet of their appraisal of India. And the creation of Aryan theories is one of their most discreditable designs. As authors, Megh and I in our paper examine some of the key dimensions of this contentious theory, right from where it stands today to some of the viewpoints that play pivotal roles in examining the entire issue, such as the need for using a more multidisciplinary approach, apart from linguistics alone to address the matter. We also place in a primary position indigenous sources as that which should be a central portion of domain data, and have hence examined Indian canons for the specific utterances of the terms Arya and Dravida in them. We have compiled them into data, into tabulated form that can serve as any further research on the matter, right? Because all of us have been discussing how these words are not present and they are being misinterpreted, but academically what we need is domain data, not just, of course, the opinions and the analysis follows later. So we have tabulated all the utterances that we have come across. So since Indo-European linguistics has been used as the primary template thus far to study Aryan theories, we have also undertaken a Purva Paksha of the principles of this particular approach, including its validity, while drawing into focus two recent quantitative studies on the matter. And we examine them from the insider's lens, how the domain has also treated our foremost linguists. As much as one would hope that with race theories being discredited in modern times for the pseudo-scientific assumptions and beliefs they propagate, the Aryan theories too would meet their eventual end, one notes that while popular sources of information, right, have set aside theories of invasion in favor of migration, as seen in this wiki page, with note 1 being the term invasion does not any longer reflect the scholarly understanding of the Indo-Aryan migrations, and is now generally regarded as polemical, distracting, and unscholarly. Even in 2017, we have a world top 80 university in its anthropology course, ironically titled Read-ins into the Indo-European Myth, continuing to use and further the term invasion, and has as one of its prescribed texts, the Rig Veda by Wendy Doniger, who unsurprisingly defines the Aryan as an Indo-European tribe that invaded India. So much for invasion being unscholarly. It is such classic textbook version of the theory, as Keppens and Rovers call it, that remains the normal even in 2017, right? Even if the scholarship in the domain may at most replace the invasion model in favor of a gradual migration, but nevertheless present a picture of the matter as though it were a scientifically and historically proven fact, with no scope for debate. So among the most visible manifestation of such scholarship is the entry for the term Aryan in the ubiquitous Oxford English Dictionary, which describes itself as the premier dictionary for academic research in the English language and an unsurpassed guide to the meaning, history, and pronunciation. So Aryan, in this most predominant dictionary, continues to be defined as denoting a people who invaded India in the 2nd century BC, displacing the Dravidian and Aboriginal peoples. And even as one is taken aback by the lack of even a remote disclaimer or a qualifier that challenges have been posed to this theory, the example sentences below that is used to illustrate the meaning become demonstrations of all the woefully fallacious and contentious tangents of this theory. In a single sentence, such as in the first example, Hinduism is projected to have started off as a Dravidian way and then become one with Aryan. The oft-repeated claims of Iran being a realm of the Aryan, the convenient opportunity to link Hindu nationalists with Aryan propaganda, the creation of imaginary social conflict between the so-called indigenous Dravidian tribes on one hand and the invading Aryans on the other. But the more damaging scholarship, right, that academically tries to present an alternate chronology of the land's history with their dating of the Rig Veda and repeatedly presenting a picture of the Aryans as the tribe that subjugated most of northern India, represent a comprehensive picture to the extent to which this has invaded all aspects of the socio-cultural part. But what that does not get represented by these mainstream sources, whether it is the Oxford Dictionary or the textbooks that are being used everywhere, are the inherent assumptions and bias that form the bedrock of this entire theory. As Keppens and Rovers, who are not any Hindu nationalists by any stretch of imagination, point out in their 2014 paper that the Aryan theories' fundamental theoretical outlines reflected the conceptual patterns in European cultural experience rather than any scientific or empirical research into the Indian past. that Indians educated within this system began to adopt this discourse as though it truly were the historical truth about India. And in the south of India, political parties were created that claimed to represent Dravidian interests, and that it is high time that we take the ongoing controversy about AIT out of the realm of partisan politics. Indeed, partisan politics and the entire political arena of some states have been built on these deeply contestable theories, as we saw illustrated even in yesterday's discussions. It is not in some remote past that we're talking about, but even as late as in 2015, that we have the leader of opposition in our parliament referring to this dogma as though it were a fact. Right? This is as late as 2015 in the most important institution of democratic India. So not only the politicians in parliament, but we also have the National Portal of India, which calls itself the Indian government's web portal for citizens and receives a traffic of more than 25,000 views per month. That until this June 2017 carried similar litany as what we saw in the Oxford Dictionary, including contentious statements that the Aryans invaded from Central Europe, and in fact even Hinduism emerged from the interactions between the Aryans and the original inhabitants. We will come back at the end of our presentation as to why this continued only until June 2017. So very clearly, not only is the more vigorous Aryan migration theory, but even the discredited, supposedly discredited Aryan invasion theory into India are very much alive even in 2017 in Western academia as well as in Indian politics, right? So with such a pervasive impact the Aryan theories have had, one looks for what its primary signatures are and notices two prominent ones. Firstly, an active non-consideration of insider sources and insider voices as something that sensibly ought to have formed a primary portion of the domain's data. And secondly, an unjustified bias towards one discipline, right, which is the linguistic domain, at the cost of dismissing several valid and pressing questions that challenge the Aryan theory's assumptions from other disciplines. In her review of the Indo-Aryan controversy, which is arguably the first publication that at least attempted to present multiple sides of the controversy and featured an entry even from the chair of our session, Shri Talagiri, noted linguist Stephanie Jameson, she declares that though archaeology might offer useful ancillary evidence with regard to the Indo-Aryan question, linguistics must remain the primary evidence, and scenarios that are highly implausible or impossible from a linguistic point of view are unlikely to be correct. While other linguists of the field, which clearly demonstrate that there is a disagreement even within the field, such as James Clatson as well as Paul Hegarty, call for a more multidisciplinary approach and show the disagreement itself. Clatson remarks that from the linguistic data alone, without taking into account the evidence of archaeology or early texts, it is not possible to draw a definite conclusions about the homeland of the speakers of the Proto-Indo-European or even the age of the language family. The Indo-European model as a model of language relationships and of linguistic descent tells us nothing certain about the origin of the Indid civilization. Paul Hegarty too echoes that linguistics alone cannot come to the most plausible overall scenario, and he calls for a truly multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary understanding of prehistory. We then have Michel Denino's work, which provides a highly well-suitable example for the range of questions that begin to serve as basis sets when one adopts a more multidisciplinary approach to the issue. The list notably commences with literary. What do the texts actually say? Something which we will look closely in dimension 2 of our paper. And linguistic trails at the end of the list, where he rather correctly asks in our view, does linguistics demand or depend on the Aryan scenario? While the position of many Indian archaeologists, starting with B.B. Lal, on Aryan invasion theory couldn't be more categorical in denouncing it, that position is getting reinforcement from archaeologists from across the world, such as that of Schaffer as well as Lichtenstein, who categorically point out that the description by many contemporary scholars of a migrating, invading Aryan social group from a homeland somewhere northwest of South Asia is equivalent to an example of Anderson's imagined communities. This is a community of the past which is imagined, created to justify a present identity. From the verifiable domains of physical sciences, we have experts such as Prasanna taking a clear stand that based on evidences from astronomy, mathematics, and metallurgy, they find no scientific basis for the Aryan invasion theory. Notable voices such as that of our chair, Talageri ji, also accentuate the role of the multidisciplinary approach, and especially that of the textual analysis. The spread of languages can be analyzed or researched only through the field of linguistics, archaeology, and textual analysis. It cannot be traced through the study of genetics, which can neither prove nor disprove the AIT or the OIT. So with such clear instances, right, as well as stands coming from the multidisciplinary approach, one also draws focus on the implications in chronology that the Indo-European linguists' approach and data itself has had. As Klatzen and Perelsweg remark, the Indo-Europeanist data and method do not allow the question, when was the PIE even spoken? Establishing such absolute chronologies based solely on linguistic facts is virtually impossible, as words and grammatical structures rarely bear direct signs of when they were born. The only way to establish absolute linguistic chronologies is to correlate linguistic facts with dates fixed by other means. Since Aryan invasion theories into India have had such mammoth consequences, especially for India and Indians, we authors not only believe in approaching the debate from the multidisciplinary approach, but also believe that the colossal repository of literary material that is available in India, especially the textual, ought to form a primary portion of the domain data. So what we did is we undertook a study of some of the earliest Sanskrit texts. Our paper has all the detailed references, for particularly the terms Arya and Dravida, to present a depth view of their contrast with distortion surrounding the key pivots of the Aryan theories, that is the terms themselves, that is the Aryan and Dravidian. So we place them in their rightful frame so that this database can serve for any further research, right? It's a hard data. So we list and tabulate as exhaustively as we can to answer the questions. What is the range of meanings evident from the usage of Arya and Dravida? Is there any evidence to legitimize interpretation of Arya and Dravida as languages? Is there any evidence for an invasion of Arya by Dravida, of Dravida by Arya? And is there any evidence for a migration of Aryas from outside and into India? So our paper documents all the, we have compiled everything from the whatever as comprehensively as we could, so that it's a database that is available. This is not opinion, this is hard fact. So all of these are there in the paper. So in our tabulation of the occurrences based on the data, we observed the following. Throughout all the texts that we analyzed, we found no mention or reference to any Aryan migration or invasion into India event. Yeah, into India event. We also found no references to the word Dravida in any of the books of the Tolkappiyam. And surely if Dravidians or their supposed variant, the former Dasyus, had indeed been involved in any clash with the Aryans, there should have been some mention of it, at least in these texts. Neither did we find references to the term in Srimad Bhagavad Purana or Kalidasa's Abhijnana Shakuntalam, Raghuvansham, Kumara Sambhavam. We've also taken Skanda Purana. So we have tried to take a domain which represents as many important words as possible from the Indian canon, spread over a timeline as well. The most earliest words as well as recent literary, so that all the data is compiled. In the many references of the occurrences we found in Mahabharata, Arya as a word is used in both genders to address a person of cultural refinement and noble standing. So even the gender difference is there. Dravida, on the other hand, the word has never at all been one group. Wherever the word Dravida has occurred, we never found one group that has been highlighted against another among the southern kingdoms itself, let alone any Aryan Dravidian clash or any migration. So with such a clear null result from the data, one is forced to ask questions, including why only selected readings and interpretations of the Rig Veda form the supposed basis for the Aryan theory's claims, instead of the entire Indian canon. By bringing into focus the native sources into primacy, one also approaches questions pertaining to the chronology and dating of the Vedas themselves, using a more multidisciplinary approach and the rest of indigenous literature as reference points as against any other outside material. The Aryan theories set up a clash between the Aryans and Dasyus by associating race and color, with the former being fair-skinned and the latter dark-skinned. We have repeatedly seen in every context of the term that has been bolded and highlighted in our paper in the tables, that the term has been used for nobility associated with it and refers to that of cultural and mental aspects and nothing at all with any physical features. So with such an emphatic null result, one clearly feels that it is the Aryan theories' claims that must bear the proof of burden, as against those who have to crawl out and demonstrate the false nature of these claims. So if this second dimension of our paper considers insider data sources that we believe ought to be the primary set, the third dimension of our paper undertakes an insider Purvapaksha of the Indo-European linguistics itself. Megh will walk us through that.
So moving on now from dimension 2, insider analysis of some indigenous sources, to dimension 3, towards insider Purvapaksha of IE linguistics. In the 2014 Rutledge Handbook of Historical Linguistics, wherein editors Bowen and Evans concede, we may have not achieved a single generalized theory of language of change, include that the comparative method, which they consider to be the cornerstone of historical linguistics, is used for establishing historical relationships among languages. Linguist Claxon, though, in his book Indo-European Linguistics, a Harvard prescribed textbook for linguistics, remarks, however, the operation of the comparative method does not guarantee a language's place in the family. Only the initial recognition that two or more languages are related can do that, and that there is no absolute set of criteria beyond the general rule that the evidence must convince both the individual linguist and the majority of the scholarly community. Claxon's point, the operation of the comparative method does not guarantee a language's place in the family, is reinforced when one considers step 1 of the comparative method, as found in Lil Campbell's Historical Linguistics and Introduction, which reads, to begin to apply the comparative method, we look for potential cognates among related languages, or among languages for which there is a reason to suspect relatedness. Naturally, a question of circularity presents itself. If languages are already related, what relationship remains to be established? Interestingly, senior scientist at Department of Linguistics and Cultural Evolution at Max Planck University for the Science of Human History, Johan Mattis, alludes to how surprised biologists are about the restrictions in the comparative method followed by linguists. He says, and I quote, a particularly important rule that is often surprising for biologists is the rule that says that we can only compare languages that we know are related. We could of course compare all languages in the world, and people do compare all languages in the world, but the point is that we are not allowed to compare languages historically unless we know whether they share a common origin, which might have been fixed 200 years ago. So that's the scientificity of it. In a critical appraisal of the methods of historical linguistics titled Logic, Fallacy, Reasoning and Superficial Resemblance, scholar from Department of Computer Science of Montclair State University, H.M. Hubey, includes in a section Circulus in Demonstrando, a particular odious fallacy of this time is committed often by historical linguists in this form, i.e. languages are generally related because method X proves it so. Since method X says IE languages are genetically related, and we know that the IE languages have been proven to be genetically related, then method X works. Therefore, method X is the only method that can prove genetic links between amongst languages. There are so many things wrong with this line of argument, of no argument rather, that one is appalled that it is continuously argumentum ad nauseum repeated on practically every electronic mailing list, nary a complaint from anyone. This is the computer scientist talking. Contemporary linguist Marcantonio's observations are rather telling that confirmation bias has strongly affected the IE theory. It has not been scientifically founded. There is no reason to uphold the thesis that Sanskrit is genetically connected to the other supposed IE languages. It would be circular to conclude that these attested verbs are inherited just because of the establishment of reconstructions. Only 22.6% of the total number of relevant conjugations match the Werner's predictions, which is the Werner's law, that all traditionally established IE sound laws should be revisited. This is from their own domain, right? A person from their own domain. And that a theory of this sort may not be regarded as not even wrong, in the sense that it is built up in such a self-consistent way that it cannot be either verified or falsified. Head of Delhi University Sanskrit Department Girish Nath Jha has observed the following about Indic languages, that the sound systems of all Indian languages across families show remarkable similarity in terms of vowels and consonant systems, syllable structure and sandhi formation, and the common vocabulary store of Indian languages on both sides of the Vindhyas in excess of 50%. Malayalam, the newest Dravidian language, is as much as 75% of Sanskrit vocabulary, and when used in the literary tradition, Tamil has 48% or more. I'm not walking through all the quotes. Now, we looked at two recent quantitative analysis. Lars Borin, Anju Saxena, Tarak Rama and Bernard Comrie in their 2014 paper Linguistic Landscaping of South Asia using digital language resources, genetic versus aerial linguistics, report that from their experiments they recover both inter-family and intra-family genealogical relations from the 4 major South Asian language families, that no indications of aerial phenomena could be seen using the method of LISI comparative vocabulary. But what they do, interestingly, is disown their own result. What they say is, this is the scientific result that we have obtained, but because it conflicts with the hypothesis, we will leave the result, we will stick to the hypothesis. Similarly, authors of a 2015 paper titled Study of Similarity Among Indian Languages using Language Verification Framework, a study that yielded significant correlations between Sanskrit and Tamil, instead of considering the possibility of a relationship between Sanskrit and Tamil, which is what their quantitative approach yields, decidedly instead call their own result incoherent. Now, if criticism of the comparative method, emergence of results contrary to established hypotheses from approaches seemingly more scientific and applied on larger databases is one step, we now look at Purvapaksha of linguistics domain already undertaken from Insider Drishti. And one way to start that would be to be reminded of this quote from Breaking India. Once the Indian texts have been mined for their treasures and that has been processed through translations, mistranslations, plagiarism, rejections and extrapolations, and Indian knowledge have been securely relocated as Western, the Indian source lost its earliest glamour. In Theories of Language, Oriental and Occidental, Professor Korada Subramaniam, who was there in our SI2 conference, includes potential appropriations, critiques, people considered stalwarts in Western linguistics. Just one example on Humboldt, I can say with all certainty that Humboldt was referring to by the inner form of knowledge was the concept postulated by Vaiyakarnas, especially Patanjali, in the Pashapasha of Mahabhashya. The generation of sounds, Varna, described by Humboldt is exactly in line with Panini's Shiksha. Now, the other critiques include those of de Saussure and Noam Chomsky. Interestingly, a new history of humanities in 2013, authored by Bod, includes the following about the formalism of Panini's language. Grammar. His formalism even served in the 20th century as the basis for the first high-level programming languages as Algo L60, which also work on the basis of a fully specified system of rules. Virtually all programming languages are written in the formalism that uses Panini's linguistic notion of grammar. Such a grammar can determine whether a given sequence of statements forms the correct expression in the particular programming language or not. Yet, the Harvard stratification of history of linguistics ascribes scientification of linguistics not to the tradition of Panini, but to the 19th century neo-grammarians. In fact, Panini fails to make it even to Margaret Thomas' top 3, those considered to be, quote, with unquestionable influence and importance in her 50 key thinkers of language and linguistics. The top 3 who, according to her, are considered to be with, quote, unquestionable influence and importance are Plato, Saussure and Chomsky, the latter 2 who featured in the critique of Korada Subramaniam. Further, historical linguistics is such a precise science that at least 17 names are in the reckoning for the title of father of comparative linguistics. Having not found one after looking, and in order to facilitate future Purvapaksha, as a framing step, we have compiled Table 2, a chronological frame of those considered to have contributed to linguistics. And this table contains names of 88 people born between 1100 and 1900, arranged chronologically by year of birth. It further highlights those names that are associated with Sanskrit and hence Aryan and Dravidian. So there are 51 related to Sanskrit, 5 related to Dravidian and 17 names that are attributed Indo-European laws. So for future research, if anybody wants to quickly look at something, you could perhaps start from here. It was observed that 16 of the 17 names associated with Indo-European laws have some Sanskrit connection, underlining therefore the criticality of Sanskrit to Indo-European laws. While we saw earlier Marcantonio's critique of Werner's law, we observed closely that only one law is ascribed to more than one person, to 5 people. To be precise, the law of palatals. Now, after having mined Sanskrit in multiple ways from at least mid-16th century, Sanskrit gets displaced by Greek as a better representative of the original situation on seemingly these 2 grounds, that Sanskrit offers a simple vowel triad rather than the more complicated vowel triangle apparently, and the lack of representation of the short E and O in the Sanskrit alphabet. Now let us look at point 1, that Sanskrit offers a simple vowel triad. Now if we look at this table, this is our native categorization as found in the Gita Press edition. You have Swara as a category. Now A, E, U by the Sanskrit tradition without doubt are a matra shorter than A, O. But what native category calls this primary against vowels, and just because A and O have a matra more, does that make does that mean that one can make a statement that Sanskrit offers only a simple vowel triad? So the basis seems rather questionable in order to displace Sanskrit and replace Greek instead. Now if you look at the next point which was said, with regard to the second point, the supposed lack of representation of the short E and O in the Sanskrit alphabet is not only rendered baseless when one considers Pujya Mahaperiyawal late Shri Chandrasekhar Saraswati Swamigal's quote, and he says, on going through Patanjali's commentary on the sutras of Panini, I discovered that Sanskrit too has these short vowels, and it was a comforting discovery. Patanjali says that in chanting of the Satyamugri and Ranayina shakas of the Samaveda, the short E and O are used. In our paper, we have given the references to the Patanjali's work, right? So the 2 critical points that actually displaced Sanskrit and replaced it with Greek, from our point of view, requires much closer view and perhaps is not tenable. The hypocrisy of hurling cultural ideological motivations, nationalism, at those who challenge AIT, AMT into India and PIE becomes evident when one considers the following inclusion by John Goldsmith and Bernard Lax in the Language and Mind Sciences. The dawning realization that there was an Indo-European family with a considerable depth in time and cultural richness served to provide a new answer to European issues of identity. While a comprehensive compilations of all appropriations from Sanskrit would be a natural subset of Purva Paksha of IE linguistics, in addition to Table 2 and critique of the law of palatals, we highlight potential appropriations from Sanskrit by a scholar attributed the tag, the first great American linguist, William Dwight Whitney. As is evident from this figure, Whitney is seen as a key node across various generations preceding the neo-grammarians. According again to Goldsmith and Lax in their recently published Language and Mind Sciences, it was Whitney who introduced the various parts of articulatory apparatus, the lungs, the larynx, the pharynx, and the parts of mouth. They also add that along with the curt p in the first place, go their nearest kindred g the b. And this is ascribed to Whitney. Now we looked at a translation, a mere English translation of an even less known Laghu Kaumudi version, right? And both these attributions to William Dwight Whitney can be easily challenged. The attribution that the articulatory parts of speech was identified by him, when one reviews this, you will clearly see that this was already there in Panini Shiksha long before. And the second attribution that Karta Pa goes Gadaba is already part of Laghu Kaumudi, right? He's perhaps, and this was way before Whitney even went to college, right? So the irony of pointing out potential appropriations by Whitney in Madras should not be lost either, because Whitney might not have become what he became without Yale, and Yale might not have been possible without the 9 bales of cotton from Madras donated by Elihu, who amassed a fortune serving the East India Company as the governor of Madras, right? So to summarize in conclusion, we've looked at in section 2, 2017 evidence from mainstream Western academia and Indian politics, and observed how not only the Aryan migration theory into India theory, but also its supposedly discredited predecessor Aryan invasion theory are privileged in textbooks, and which hence make an insider analysis and critique of this seemingly beaten to death topic not so redundant. In section 3, bearing in mind future treatments of this topic, we have attempted dimensionalizing the problem, hopefully as a way to look at this, start with whether this should be looked as only in linguistics or multidisciplinary, irrespective of the fact that linguistics might have been the primary carrier of this problem for 200 so years. Inside our analysis of some indigenous sources, we cataloged the sources and we showed you what's through table 1, right? And finally, in the third dimension, a step towards Indo-European linguistics, where we highlighted differences in positions even within linguists vis-a-vis the robustness of their methods, including some critiques of the domain's methods, analyzed 2 recent quantitative studies, compiled the chronological table of 88 people, critique law of palatals and appropriations of Whitney. Remember, Manogna had said that we'll come back to the point on why 2017 June with regards to the National Portal of India. That's because all the 7 statements and what you see as strike-throughs was something that Manogna and I, through a 6-month engagement with the PMO, National Informatics Center, as well as the Ministry of Electronics and Information, got it removed from our National Portal of India using the, thank you, using RTI and public grievances. Sorry for taking more time than what was offered. That's it.
Only one point I want to make is that I was the one who in fact reviewed this paper and passed it for presentation, because I feel that the data given is, basic thing is required is data, not opinions and this thing. So data about the occurrence of the words Arya, etc. are very important. But one thing I would like to point out, that Hindus, when they are opposing the Aryan invasion theory, make 2 mistakes which I find in this paper.
Okay.
That is, they refuse to accept the distinction between Aryan and Dravidian language, or it Aryan or whatever you call it. The fact is they are 2 different languages. Tamil did not come from Sanskrit. Tamil and Sanskrit are 2 independent treasures of our country. And secondly, the rejection of Proto-Indo-European also is not correct. Means you can reject the particular points in it. But if you try to show that Vedic Sanskrit was the original Aryan language, that is linguistically, it is a very complex topic. No, one point, when this, I was called for this conference, one of the questions asked was, are German and French closer to Sanskrit than Kannada, Telugu and Malayalam? And I found this question so important because see, there are people who oppose me, there are some Tamil Brahmins who are having this racist view that we are the descendants of, okay, I will not name them, but on the internet I have had battles with them. They believe they are the descendants of Aryan invaders who came in. The same view that the DK has, they have it from the opposite side. And then there are some people who oppose because they say history should not be there in the Vedas, you are insulting the Vedas by finding history. But then there is a third group of Hindu people who also oppose me, because, or who don't like it because they feel that my work, means accepting the Aryan Dravidian distinction somehow creates a division within India. So I wrote an article on this very topic and I put it on my blog so anyone can read it and the discussion can be carried further.
Thank you so much. We appreciate the views, and I think our own position is that we don't know whether Sanskrit and Tamil, which is older, which is newer, etc. Right? What we have attempted to, through the linguistic approach, use people from their own domain, right, to demonstrate that there are open areas. But just to clarify, our own position on this is that we do not think, we also definitely think that Sanskrit and Tamil are very much part of our heritage. We are saying that G.N. Jha has proposed that maybe they have a common origin. We are saying that these, the recent studies indicate there is some similarity. Maybe more work needs to be done. But we just want to clarify, is that correct?
No, let me also clarify. I am not saying they are absolutely unrelated, but there are these 19 families of which Indo-European and Dravidian are 2 separate ones. But beyond that, there are connections. Like for example, the Tamil adjective tan, nan, ni, tan. And in Sanskrit and Iranian you find tanu. And that is accepted as a very strange thing that no one can explain. But that goes to more in the past.
Absolutely, we agree with you on that, completely agree with you on that. Our focus is more to do with the principles of IE linguistics itself.
No, that
our question.
No, that is also perfectly valid.
Good morning. Think of this as part 2, since many of you had been there for part 1. So 3 points. Quickly, I won't spend time on this, Aryan invasion theory, who, where, when and what. And my focus is to present the multidisciplinary evidence for the Sanskrit-based civilization inside India before 2000 BCE. All right, so I'll go fast through this. I think this should be by heart now to everyone. Okay, so 4 aspects of it. And then today I want to focus on another group. So yesterday we talked about the AIT Walas, okay? But what has happened over many years is that we have with lot of research work coming in, work of linguistics like say Sri Kantalagiri's work or archaeology works and even genetics. So it has moved on, and you know, many Indic researchers, our side, is very happy that they have gone from this small pond of AIT to a bigger pond of Indic research or Indic timeline. So now what you see is, okay, they are very happy that they have crossed this time barrier of 1500 BCE or 2000 BCE, and now they are somewhere 800 BCE. I mean, that's like I'm talking for Buddha and Shankaracharya and whatnot. And then when it goes to 4000 BC, that's when Mahabharata, and some people will go maybe another 1000 years for Ramayana and so on. And then there is another group that actually many of the questions that came in yesterday were related to the Yuga. And by the way, I have all the questions that you ask, and I will respond to them as a FAQ or something like this on my blog. But there is another group, I call that Yuga dogma. Okay? And so what you show there is a Brahma, and then the Manvantar and Kalpa and millions and billions of years and all of that. And it's all in our literature, okay? Millions of years ago. So what happens is, now what is the common among these? Now this is indeed a great development that we went from AIT to Indic. Now that's great, you know, because we could get over the AIT. But in the language of Acharya Vinoba Bhave, he said, you know, a small pond or a big pond, it's still a pond. And Mahatma Gandhi, because of Mahatma Gandhi, we know the word Satyagraha. You know, actually the Agraha part is not the good one. You know, it's like an insistence on the truth. But you know what? Instead of Satyagraha, the better word is Satyashodhan, in search of the truth. And number of you may know the quote of Voltaire, where he said, admire those who are still searching for the truth, and be fearful of those who think they have found it. Okay? So we can get stuck from one AIT bucket to another one, and of course there is another big group who is stuck, the Indic group. Many of us are stuck into this Yuga thing. Now I'm not saying that you don't research into it, but don't bring that evidence. And what is that evidence? That is a Shabda evidence. And the first talk, a great talk again. So I want everyone to make a distinction. For example, there is a truth claim and there is a truth. There is a Shabda and there is a validated Shabda Praman. There is a difference. I mean, we want to, like you made a great case that you can trust some of the Apta and some of the great rishis of our time. But I would say, I don't want to even trust my own opinion. I don't want to trust my own judgment. I still want to verify it so that it becomes objectively testable by everyone else. All right? So the world of dogma, yes, there is some stray evidence, but mostly it's opinions, agreements, disagreements. And frankly, in this middle Indic bucket, there are many of our researchers who would go as a poster boys for our Indic cause, okay, frankly. So real science versus social science, take 30 seconds and go through that. So we have a hope, you know, but the hope is not enough. But let's focus on some real science. Now I'll go quickly through this. I showed you this is my original work. I came up with 5561 BCE for Mahabharata war, 12,209 BCE for the Ram Ravan Yuddha. Okay. Now the question is, this is fine. This is my claim, and I want everyone who does not agree with this to challenge this, critique it brutally, rationally. I'm waiting for it. I'm very open for open debate through emails, through on camera, off camera, moderated, non-moderated, does not matter, you know, and that's how we are going to progress through this. But let's see how the multidisciplinary evidence can be used. Now, this is one critique that I hear from our Indic researchers.
That's fine, you started with astronomy and now you have these dates. But is there evidence from other disciplines of science that supports this? And I'm going to show you a few examples of that in the limited time I have. River Saraswati, I quickly showed you yesterday, so I'll go fast through this. The central paleo channel. Now, I also went through the descriptions of River Saraswati from the epics, from Mahabharata and also from Ramayana. I will not repeat those. Okay. Now, question is there a scientific evidence that corroborates it? Now, yesterday I just wrote down some names of the researchers and said, trust me, take my word, that's what they are saying. I'm going to show you the actual evidence. Now, this is the map of this Saraswati Paleo channel. Now, it matters which specific areas these researchers have used for their research, where they have drilled the cores and what are they seeing. So, Desha Kalecha Patrecha Taddanam Satvikam Smrutam, so time, place, circumstances, it doesn't only apply to the dana, it also applies to drawing inferences, drawing proper inferences. So, let's look at the Clift and others and their work. This is how they drill the cores, and I'm not going to explain how they reach the conclusions. I'll jump to the conclusions with a specific area highlighted. What that is telling us is that Shatudri Satluj stopped feeding river Saraswati before 8000 BCE. I'm not going to the technical details. Okay, you can read the paper. The second big conclusion was that Yamuna separating from river Saraswati 50,000 years ago. After 50,000 years ago. Keep this in mind, especially those who asked me the question yesterday about Ramayana and why do you say it's only 13,000, how come it's not millions of years ago? Ramayana describes Yamuna, Ramayana describes Shatudri, and you have to explain that. Someone also asked me which Ramayana. If you have to do the chronology dating, it has to be Valmiki Ramayana, no other Ramayana. There are many Ramayana, but for chronology, it has to be the original Valmiki Ramayana. And Frankfurt and Mary Corty's work also supports this. Now, the Singh and others, the latest research from November 2017, that is done based on the course in the other area. So keep that in mind. You can't just say something was done in the river Saraswati and here is the conclusion. There are different interpretations. This is Kalibanga in Rajasthan, and what they did, amazing work. They took the course across this paleo channel, So these are the different areas. This is the channel, and it's around 8 kilometers wide at this location. And this is what they found. There is a lot that you can interpret from this course. I'll give you two. Think of this as the central one is the area for right now the Ghaggar Hakra, that runs here, Ghaggar Hakra, the current channel. And then these are the ends of that paleo channel. Do you know, I don't know if you can read in the back, but the dates there are 24,000 before present. So just simply, if you think of that as the grand river Saraswati with that wide paleo channel, we are looking at the timing before 20,000 BCE. And this is not the only study, there are multiple studies, but I'm just presenting you one. Okay, now the second thing, people who want to see Ramayana and some other things happening millions of years ago, at least one data point I want to present here. At the bottom, what I'm showing you there, where that yellow stops and the other color begins, below that there is no fluvial bed, which means there was no river there before 150,000 years ago. So think of that as an upper limit on some of the events that you want to interpret, give a chronology dating based on river Saraswati. Are you with me? So 150,000 is the upper limit for different reasons. So this is the location of Kalibanga that I just showed you. That's where the Grand River stopped more than 20,000 years ago. So if you ask the question, what time Satluj stopped feeding its water to river Saraswati? That they found out in this study, really, really great work, okay? And what they found, I want you to note this date. They found that Satluj stopped in 13,000 BCE. Now try to relate that with my absolute dates for Ramayana and what Ramayana says about Satluj. All right? Let me quickly jump into something new that I have not shared yesterday. Climatology evidence. Remember, we talked about the intensification and de-intensification of monsoon. Multiple data points, multiple location, multiple techniques. I'll not go into the detail, but it is showing the intensification of monsoon beginning with 9,000 before present, ending by 4,500 BCE. And here is my location of Mahabharata. That is when you see again the state of Saraswati in a flux. Okay, there is intensification of monsoon. So again, we use this triangular framework. So if anyone has a objection, typically the framework helps you. The framework helps you in a way because you can say, okay, I have a problem with your interpretation at that corner point. I don't trust the evidence, I don't trust the inference, I don't trust the objective testing, or I don't trust the background knowledge, or I don't trust your theory. All right? Okay. So these are those data points. Let me present some oceanography evidence. Now we'll begin with 5561 BCE as the year of Mahabharata war. Now Mahabharata text says that Dwarka was flooded and destroyed 36 years after the Mahabharata war. So if you add 5561 BCE plus 36, that takes us to 5525 BCE. Everyone understands? It's the BCE logic, before present. All right. So the beauty of this scientific framework is this. It doesn't have to be always the evidence in objective testing and always draw the inference. You can begin with inference. So in this case, the inference drawn from another discipline of science, namely astronomy plus the textual evidence of Mahabharata. And now you ask the question, is there evidence for this 5525 BCE? Okay. So let me walk you through it. There is evidence around the world. 25 different data points. I'm going to present 3. Okay. There is one in the Caribbean, I'm going to show you. Another in Turkey, and the third one is right where it belongs, which is the west coast of Dwarka. Caribbean. This is the data from 1995 done by one of my alumnus. I went to University of Alberta in Canada. When I was doing my master's in chemical engineering, he was doing his PhD in geology, Paul Blanchon. Again, what he showed, there is a continuous increase of sea levels for last 20,000 years. Right, because of the ice age, and the whole thing melting. However, there are certain events called CRE, catastrophic rise event. And the event that we are interested is that last third event, and the timing of that is 5600 BCE plus minus 100 years. And you know what happened? Sudden rise of 6.5 meters in water level plus minus 2.5 meters. Okay, that's in Caribbean. You say what that has to do with Dwarka? Well, let's come closer. This is Istanbul. If you have flown over Istanbul, what a beautiful view of that Bosphorus channel, and you can literally see the whole Black Sea. This area, this is the work of few geologists from Colombia, and what they showed, I'm going to speed up a little bit, is that there was a sudden sea level rise which connected the Mediterranean Sea with the Black Sea. Until this time, Black Sea was a sweet water sea. After this, suddenly it turned into a salty water sea. What is the timing? 5550 BCE. Let's come to the west coast of India and Dwarka area. What I'm showing you there is multiple studies around the world where there was a sudden sea level rise in 6th millennium BCE. But let's take the one that's most appropriate, most relevant, which is for the Arabian Gulf. And what do you see? I'm going to draw the bars. In 6th millennium BCE, there was a sudden rise of about 15 meters, 15 meters in the 6th millennium BCE itself. And then the 5th millennium BCE, there was another 8 meters rise. All right. So that's the oceanography evidence for flooding of Dwarka in 5525 BCE. All right. And then let's quickly run to seismology evidence. So there are these different earthquake events. This is the location of Mool Dwarka. How many of you know that there is a place called Mool Dwarka, which is different than the Dwarka that we visit right now? Okay, and I consider that as a proxy for the original Dwarka, which is under the sea now. And if you go back into historical records for the earthquakes, you go back, and I'm just putting that against it so you can see where it is. So the first one is there. So yes, earthquake, no flood. If you see, the water level is actually going down. If you go to the next one, something similar. And there is a third record. This is the work of Rajendran from Trivandrum, now at I think in Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore. 5540 BC plus minus 130 BC. Okay. All right. And then people ask me what happened between the 5561 BC Mahabharata, 13 millennium BCE Ramayana, nothing in between. Now there is a good reason why a lot of evidence has been lost, but that's not part of the talk today, you know. But what I want to show you is if you take a text like Surya Siddhanta, nothing to do with Mahabharata. This is a great work of ISRO, former ISRO scientist Anil Narayanan. He's in Washington DC now. He showed there is a clear evidence, and we have the papers, for specific 4 updates to Surya Siddhanta. What are their timings? 570, 3100, 5300 BCE, 7500 BCE. And there is a one more. Now there was another presenter, Rupa Bhatti. She could not make it because of serious health condition, and she was going to present another paper. So it is a joint work of her with me, and we have detected another very significant distinct update in Surya Siddhanta for 12,000 BCE, and we are publishing it very soon. So now if you take those updates, somebody is updating Surya Siddhanta at these times. If you consider those updates, now suddenly the whole timeline starts filling. Now to that, suppose if you add Shatapat Brahman, you know, and Shankar Balakrishna Dikshit talked about 3000 BC. Pracho Disha na Chavante, you know, the Kritikas are rising due east. But you know what? It's a repetitive phenomenon. We have no reason. I'm not saying that it happened before and that's the one, but it doesn't have to be 3000 BC. In fact, it also happened in 15,000 BC. Now, how do we know which one? Okay. And then if you go to the story of Trishanku, where Vishwamitra got angry and started the calendar with Shravana Nakshatra as the first one, you can perfectly match that with that 13th, 14th millennium BC, or another reference of fall of Abhijit from Mahabharata. Now, it's not the timing of Mahabharata. It is a reference, ancient reference quoted in the Mahabharata. How many of you know that? Fall of Abhijit reference? Some of you. Abhijit Spardamana tu Rohini Kanyashasvasa Ichanti Jeshtata Devi Tapastaptam Vanam Gata. It's a wonderful reference, of ancient reference, you know, and that you can find out as around 15 millennium BCE. So it quickly fills up. So I'll stop here, and I don't know if you have a time, but if you have time, we'll take any questions or respond to any objections.
Just one or two questions if you have thought that one question only.
In Shatudri, well, they did 8,000 BC, stopped to 13,000, around 5,000.
Yeah.
So the geology and oceanography dates, they have various studies come up with the various dates. How can we say that this will be an evidence based on one particular study? So how can we reconcile these studies?
The 8000 BC, this is Clift and others. I mean, this is Singh at top, but I'm going to show you where this is. So 8000 BC is based on the Shatudri meeting Saraswati is based on course done in this area. And if you see the dotted line, so their interpretation why that data shows up is because Shatudri going meeting Ravi here, and then that actually coming here, and another paleo channel meeting at Marot, that is now in Pakistan. So that's 8000 BC. But if you go upstream, and then you look at when did Shatudri separated from, stopped feeding the waters to Saraswati based on Rupanagar, and afterwards, then it stopped before 13,000 BCE.
Multiple claims are still.
Yes, yes, yeah. So, I mean, someone is going to pull some other claim to claim something else. My point is, you need another claim coming from another discipline of science, and then you might take a hydrology evidence. Pure hydrology evidence or pure oceanography evidence of flooding of Dwarka area by itself is never sufficient. But that has been done for 1500 BCE or 3000 BCE, and there is no flood in 3000 BCE, by the way.
So what about the timeline for the battle of the 10 kings as noted
From the Rigveda?
From the Rigveda.
Yeah, I don't know. And you know what?
Much earlier than what you are.
Honestly, I don't know, and you know what? That is a perfectly legitimate answer.